Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we convene our second of 5 sessions on the question of forgiveness in a time of duress. Yesterday, as we began our program, it was the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz on January 27th, 1945. The world leaders from various nations and the few Auschwitz survivors that still remain with us gathered. In honor of that, I told the story of Simon Wiesenthal in a concentration camp being taken to a German soldier. And the German soldier, as he lay dying, literally asked Simon Wiesenthal, a Jew, to forgive him. And Mr. Wiesenthal left in silence and never really resolved the question, but he wrote a book called The Sunflower that opened up the scope of forgiveness by asking theological leaders, spiritual leaders, political leaders, philosophers to comment on whether they would have forgiven the German and the atrocities that he committed. I want to broaden our notion of forgiveness today within the context of the Buddhist doctrine of dependent origination. You know, we often think here's this young Jewish man in a concentration camp. He's taken to a German hospital. He meets a German soldier. The German soldier says, "Will you forgive me?" We tend to think about forgiveness in a limited scope. But what we know about ontology, physics, metaphysics is that it's all interconnected. And I want to connect that one event of Simon Wiesenthal's in the following way, in the spirit of the Socratic notion of truth pursued rather than truth possessed. Because the more I understand in my limited way about the power of forgiveness, the less I think I know about its efficacy and its parameters. We can even, starting with the Germans. The Germans were Hitler's willing executioners, as that book title suggested. And oftentimes we say that that soldier was following orders. It was Hitler. And maybe the whole German race was involved in some way. Was Simon Wiesenthal expected to also forgive, in addition to the soldier, the Fuhrer, the German people? It was President Roosevelt and Churchill that denied boats filled with Jewish refugees and sent them back to Europe, knowing about the Holocaust. Were some of the Jews that Roosevelt sent back, were they in the concentration camp? Should Simon Wiesenthal forgive Roosevelt, Churchill, Stalin? The Germans weren't responsible for anti-Semitism. That had been incubating in the European mind for 2,000 years, initiated by the Christians. Should Simon Wiesenthal have been expected to forgive the Christian religion, Western civilization? And finally, Benjamin Netanyahu was in Poland yesterday. The Poles announced in advance they wouldn't arrest him for crimes against humanity. In the charges that have been brought against him by the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, adjudicating whether he and Israel is guilty of genocide. And one of the supreme ironies of history, the genocide conducted by the Germans against the Jews finds a reciprocity right now as the Israelis, according to the International Criminal Court and virtually every commentator in the world outside of the United States and a few European nations, consider what the Israelis have been doing to be genocide. What's the connection between this genocide and that genocide? There's been speculation, which we could go into, about the relationship. Should Simon Wiesenthal, in addition to considering forgiving Karl Seidel, the German soldier, forgiving the Fuhrer, forgiving the German people, forgiving Roosevelt, Churchill, that denied passage to the Jews, knowing what they knew, Western civilization that had given rise to anti-Semitism because of the Christian impulse. Should he then finally have been asked to forgive Israel for its genocide against the Palestinians? So when one takes in the reality of dependent origination, as the Buddha called it, but in modern physics, the entanglement of every proton and atom and molecule and life form with everything else that exists, the boundaries of forgiveness become gossamer. And in the end is what we are expected to do, simply to forgive everything that is, including ourselves, for what it is that we have been wounded by. Just questions to ponder in this time of assault on our morality, and a time when it seems as if iniquity is on the throne and truth and justice and empathy are on the gallows. So thank you, everyone, for joining us here on Humanity Rising for this very deep and profound exploration of forgiveness in our time.